I'm Wendy Strothman. I'm co-chair of the 250th, and it's a pleasure to have you here today. When I was asked a couple of years ago if I would co-chair this awesome look back at Brown's history and trying to get at the whole question of what constitutes Brown's DNA, the first thing I thought about were all the amazing writers who went to Brown, especially in the 80s and 90s and aughts, but even before. Just names started to tick through my head, and they're all in this book. So we got in touch with Judy Sternlight, who had been an editor at Vintage, and she and David Ebershoff and John Karp at Simon & Schuster and I got together and started to brainstorm and try to, we didn't put in everybody we could have because we wanted to limit it to 50. It was really, really hard to make these choices, but we're absolutely thrilled at the overall picture of Brown that you'll get if you read all of these pieces together. So it's thrilling to have some of our contributors here today. And we'll try to go in chronological order, which I've lost, but I'll find it. Because I'd like you to get a sense from the end of the day of what stayed the same about Brown and what's changed. So we'll do a little bit of reading. I hope we'll do some talking and interacting. Sean can show, not read. He did that fabulous frontispiece for the reader, the Pearly Gates. Welcome. And Charlie, I think you are a senior writer.
That's a polite way of saying I'm old.
Right.
That's right, I'm used to being
I know, no water. Thank you.
Should I get started?
Yeah, go.
Okay.
This is Charlie Bakst, the Providence Journal.
Retired.
Those of you in Rhode Island certainly know.
Thank you very much. I have an essay in here, obviously, in the book, but I brought a Xerox because I've cut out about half of it for time purposes. So I hope you'll all buy the book and read the whole thing. On the morning of September 28th, 1965, that was 49 years ago tomorrow, I walked into the Blue Room in Faunt's house, badly in need of coffee after spending most of the night overseeing publication of a Brown Daily Herald issue that would become a national media sensation. The headline over the news story said, "For women at Pembroke College, Brown Health Center prescribes birth control pills." As BDH editor-in-chief, I had penned a blistering editorial backing the policy, but labeling the Pembroke administration, headed by Dean Rosemary Perel, as hypocritical or blind for presiding over a Victorian social system that obsessed over curfews and barred women from living in off-campus apartments. I bought my coffee at the counter, turned, and was accosted by a Pembroke junior. Something about the issue had offended her. Amid her torrents of words, I asked contemptuously, "Who are you?" She replied, "I'm Liz Farrow, and if you're going to write about Pembroke, you better know who I am." This would prove to be a key conversation in my life, but at the time it meant nothing. After all, I was M. Charles Bakst, a senior in a hurry to be great. In my own mind, I already was. And I presided over a mighty publication that routinely battled Brown and Pembroke administrators over long-running issues like women visiting in men's dormitories, or really it could be anything, such as the university's drinking policies or its handling of the bicentennial celebration. That would be not 250, but 250 years ago. And when student organizations disappointed us, we would whack them too. And now we had the attention of the national press, which was intrigued by the avant-garde story of a doctor for a women's college willing to prescribe birth control pills. So far, only 2 students had taken advantage of this opportunity, but the precedent was set. Of course, calling Pembroke a college was somewhat amiss. The university's classrooms were co-ed, student activities were increasingly co-ed, and indeed that very autumn would see the launch of co-ed dining at lunch, one of our paper's mini crusades. Still, Pembrokers had their own deans, dormitories, and social systems, with sign-out times and curfews a constant issue for debate. Men had no curfews, and unlike the women, could live off campus. It's startling to look back at those years when tuition, room, and board came to less than $3,000. Each spring, listen to this carefully, this is unbelievable. Each spring, 3 sign-up sheets would sprout on a bulletin board in Pembroke Hall. They were for Pembroke seniors heading for graduate school or business careers or marriage. Yes, you read that right. If a young lady became engaged, she would sign the engaged list so the whole school would know. Other customs of the times, well, if a guy was taking a girl to a football game, they would both dress up. If a girl didn't have a date, she wouldn't go. And speaking of dates, when a guy walked into Andrews Hall to call on a girl, he'd say whom he was there to see, and the receptionist would summon her. And if you kept showing up for the same girl, the receptionist would summon her as soon as you went to the lobby. God forbid you were there to see a different girl. Back to the paper. Where am I here? We were often impatient with students, but the larger battle was with the university officials and trustees. And then in December 1965, our tenure nearing an end, our world crashed. Faced one night with a shortage of staff and copy editors, my 2 managing editors and I crafted a hoax issue announcing that at last up to 100 Pembrokers would be allowed to have off-campus apartments. Applications would be taken immediately. Yes, we were looking for a short-term chuckle or gotcha, but there was a serious purpose behind this glitzy news. It was something people would want to believe, something that would seem logical and desirable, and it had the potential to stimulate real debate. It would not have embarrassed the university if it were true, but it wasn't. Many students were angry. We violated their trust. The university administration was furious with us. Our credibility was shot, and the 3 of us resigned. Interestingly, our bogus claim indeed presaged reality. That April, Dean Perel, so long a holdout, made the breathtaking announcement that university trustees had approved a plan for up to 30 Pembrokers to move off campus. I knew one of the Pembrokers who got an apartment. In a way, you do too from reading this. Remember Elizabeth Farrow, who scolded me in Ford's house on the day of the birth control issue? Well, in second semester, we found ourselves sharing a class, Professor Bill McLaughlin's Social and Intellectual History of the United States. We began sitting together and shooting the breeze and dating. In her senior year, she proceeded to live off campus. I was at Columbia Journalism School, but our romance endured. On June 6, 1967, we were married, and we still are. And I have a special treat for you. That's Elizabeth right there.
Charlie, I love the way you evoke that era because I graduated in '72, and my freshman year was the last year of the posture pictures. And if you don't know what they are, ask somebody. But we all had to line up in our underwear in the gym for this dirty old man who was a fake scientist to take our pictures to make sure we didn't have scoliosis, and if we had straight enough backs, we wouldn't have to take gym class. And the era was you wanted to get out of gym class because mostly you were bowling at the bottom of Pembroke Hall. And so we had to do that. We had the parietal lobes, we had everything Charlie described, and a year later it was all gone. It was just all gone. So it's amazing how things can build and build and build and then change overnight. So I think you evoked that kind of prehistoric era very well.
Kind of weird stuff in the
Thank you. Mara, I think you're next. This is
Okay.
Mara Liasson. You probably recognize her voice.
Okay, my essay is so short, I'm sure I can read it in the allotted time. Okay, how I became, just like what I'm used to. Okay, how I became a freelance writer at Brown by Mara Liasson. In my sophomore year at Brown, I talked my way into a class taught by John Thomas. It was a seminar called Early 20th Century American Radicals. The title alone was a siren song I couldn't resist, being a self-styled late 20th century American radical junior grade. It was a seminar for upperclassmen. I can't remember what I said to Thomas to get him to let me in, but he agreed. And I don't remember much of what we discussed in class, just that the small lecture hall was dim and Thomas smoked cigarettes, which back then made him seem a little tough and hard-bitten, not suicidal. I wrote a paper for that class about Alfred Stieglitz and the artists he showed at his gallery at 291 Fifth Avenue. I submitted it to a student essay contest at a magazine I had never heard of called American Art Review. It got chosen and appeared in July of 1975 as The 8 and 291, Radical Art in the First 2 Decades of the 20th Century. I received $100 in prize money. I was a published writer. I remember how excited I was as I opened the magazine. It was glossy with full-page illustrations. And then the sick feeling that came over me when I realized the first line of my essay had been rewritten. Instead of a sea change, there was now the clunkier, I thought, radical transformation. I was a published writer with an editor. In September of that year, my roommate answered a knock on the door of our dorm room and found a man who announced himself as a dealer who was looking for Mara. She flipped out and ran to find me at Font's house, certain that I had gotten involved in drugs over the summer. But he was an art dealer from Boston who had read my essay in American Art Review. He had asked the Brown Registrar how to find me, was told where I lived, something that would never happen today, and tracked me down at my dorm to offer me a freelance writing assignment. He had bought the entire output of a painter called Jarrett A. Benneker and needed someone to write the catalog essay for an exhibit of Benneker's work at the Vose Galleries in Boston. He would pay me $500, which I thought was a huge fee. Benneker was a kind of socialist Norman Rockwell who painted portraits of factory workers in Ohio. I signed up for James Patterson's psychohistory class, wrote a biography of Benneker, and then turned that into the catalog essay. Looking back, the whole thing seems so improbable. Everything that happened seemed like a series of happy accidents. Brown was teaching me that this is how the world works. One thing leads to another. I started thinking that maybe I could make a living doing this, or something like this. Meanwhile, I took every class of Professor Thomas's that I could, and in my senior year, I wrote my American History honors thesis with him. It had the embarrassing to me now title, The Federal Writers Project and the Folklore of Cultural Pluralism. My husband jokes that I should have called it The Federal Writers Project and the Single Girl and left it at that. The process of writing a thesis with Jack Thomas, everyone knew him as Jack, was scary and sublime. Tacked to the door of his office in the history department was a newspaper cartoon of an old-fashioned bomb, the kind that looks like a bowling ball with a lit fuse, with arms and legs. That was meant, I guess, to illustrate his infamous temper, though I personally never witnessed a Thomas explosion. Jack Thomas was tall and solid, and he had a crushed-looking nose, which someone told me he had achieved in a boxing ring. It was a great story and much too good to check. To me, he was larger than life. He held office hours at 4 p.m. I can still recall going to see him with a draft of a thesis chapter. He sat behind his desk with his back to the window, the late afternoon sun streaming in. He was a huge, hulking shadow wreathed in cigarette smoke. The chair for students was right in front of the desk facing the window. It was very cinematic, a perfectly lit set for an intimidating academic experience. As he worked his way through my draft, there was nothing for me to do but tremble and squint. I still believe that he planned it exactly that way. Thomas was exacting, but also warm and encouraging. He wasn't just interested in my ideas, he expected me to have some. And he marched my thesis down the field and helped me heave it over the finish line, chapter by rewritten chapter. I couldn't have asked for a better teacher or editor. In the 35 years since, I've thought a lot about what I learned from him about American history, about how ordinary people as well as elected officials make history, how ideas matter, and how the intellectual seeds of reform are planted decades before they ever come to fruition. And above all, because Jack Thomas was a great writer of history, how important it is to communicate in simple, clear language. There probably wasn't a straight line from Jack Thomas's American history classes to covering American politics at NPR, but it feels like there was, because Brown gave me the confidence and the freedom to navigate my own ship even before I had any idea where it would end up.
Thank you. I'd like to call on Sean to maybe talk a little bit about both serendipity in the writing process and also the exactitude that Jack Thomas, whom many of us really admired, put you through. Did anybody in the audience ever have Jack Thomas as a teacher? He was amazing, wasn't he? Kind of a legend. So can you just speak a bit?
Sure, glad
Thank
to.
you.
Thank you. I admire these writers who have read their work beautifully. So what I did instead was an illustration. So I'm just going to recreate it now, if you don't mind. I'll start right here. But because they put so much work into the thousands of words that they produced for their beautiful essays, I just made one drawing. So I kind of feel like I took this assignment satisfactory, no credit. But it was a really nice challenge, and I felt so lucky to be invited because I had already done quite a lot of drawings about Brown over the decades. Even before I got to Brown, I made a big poster that I slipped in with my application. This is back when applications were on paper and in paper envelopes. Paper is this white flat stuff that sometimes comes in sheets. But I had been drawing all kinds of pictures of all different parts of Brown while I was a student working for the Brown Daily Herald, and even after graduation when I worked and did drawings for the Brown Alumni magazine. So I'd already done drawings about admissions and commencement and reunions. So it was a nice challenge to try to figure out, well, what have I not done? And with a wide open assignment like this, that's one of the trickiest things of all, when you have the freedom to do anything you want, which was a huge luxury. It's really tricky to figure out, well, what are you going to do? So I began by eliminating what I had already done, and I got that out of the way. So I knew there were a couple of things I had not yet done, one of which are the wonderful Van Wickle gates. And I realized that they were a nice opportunity for me to suggest how I really felt about Brown, because for me, Brown really was a heavenly place. And so I saw an opportunity to make use of the Van Wickle gates and its resemblance to another familiar cartoon cliche of pearly gates, because I really thought of Brown as a heavenly place, and every time I come back here, it really feels like heaven. And I personally, for myself, I hope I actually end up in heaven rather than that other place, which is Dartmouth. So in order to see the drawing, you should buy it at the Brown Bookstore, $5.99, also at Amazon.com and other fine retailers. Thank you.
Stick to the independent booksellers. Marie both was a student here and taught here, so I'm interested in hearing your piece. She's written a wonderful memoir, and also talk a little bit the difference perhaps between being a student here and a professor here.
Right. And I'm also a very wordy writer, so when I was trying to figure out how to sort of excerpt my piece. Sorry. So M. Charles Bakst talked about the social and intellectual history of the United States and how important a class that was to him. And when you were at Brown, I was in utero. And Bill McLaughlin's class, as you'll see in my piece, is also changed my life as well. So I'm going to start basically in the middle, which is right after I came to Brown, all excited about being a writer and being rejected from my first creative writing workshop. Having already shattered my self-image as a broody creative writing concentrator, I turned to writing for the Brown Daily Herald. My first story was an interview with Sasha Frere Jones, a first year whose great-grandfather had written King Kong. The next, a piece about other published writers on campus. I didn't show too much talent for journalism either. The editors complained that I wrote too slowly, turned in items that were much too long, and I always buried the lead. At the end of the day, this isn't what I wanted to do either. Around this time, I came up with a new concentration, economics. My parents, Korean War refugees, were unhappy with my fleeing the pre-med program, but they felt economics was an acceptable substitute. I had developed an interest in developmental economics, but another facet of my decision was the relatively low number of classes the econ concentration required. Beyond that, I had no grand plan. All my life, I'd reflexively excelled, or at least striven for extreme competence in anything I tried. Show me a structure, and I'd work within it with utmost discipline and effort. I could have easily forced myself through pre-med, but pursuing my odd jury-rigged academic experience, solely lacking in specifics on how this was going to help me become a writer, was weirdly pleasing to me, perhaps because my life up until this point had been severely regimented. My friend Fee, who was a history concentrator, alerted me that the U.S. History Survey, History 52, was going to be taught by the eminent scholar, Bill McLaughlin, who rarely taught these large lecture classes. Even though I didn't have a particular interest in history, I signed up. I was surprised and delighted to find that the class was taught entirely using novels. The Jungle, Babbitt, The Damnation of Thayer and Ware, The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, The Milagro Beanfield War. I can't say exactly what constituted the alchemy of combining novels and history, but some kind of nuclear fusion occurred in my brain. When we covered anti-immigration sentiment in the 1920s and arrived at the racial unrest of the 60s, I knew I wanted to write about the ethnic and racial aspects of those moments in history. So now I'm skipping forward to actually being a writer. The last election season, I was even called upon to do some political writing for Salon, and I wrote a New York Times op-ed, "My Asian Dad and Mitt Romney's Muffin Tops," a satire not at all out of step with Babbitt. For my fiction, my vestigial interest in medicine has been transformed into a novel about a doctor struggling to fit his practice within the capitalistic confines of consumer-based medicine. While researching it, I even wore a white coat and was embedded with the Brown medical students on their OBGYN rotation. I have an abiding regret that my father is no longer alive to see that I did, in my own way, make it to medical school. The novel has demanded years of immersing myself in subjects traversing literature, nanotechnology, biomedicine, history, and finance. This very much includes my economic study, as well as being literarily indebted to a little-known Sinclair Lewis novel about medical education, Aerosmith, that I probably would not have discovered if I hadn't encountered Babbitt in History 52. I tracked down 3 additional alums who'd been in this singular class, and even though it was more than 20 years ago, they all remember this course we took in the spring of 1985 and have lively memories of the novels, the outstanding TAs, and how on the first day, the dignified professor grabbed our attention by blasting Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. He then asked us to take a moment to think about the experience of being born in America and what that meant to us personally and in the larger context of history. My parents continued to be upset about my career choices, especially after I left my last financial position at Goldman Sachs. They called weekly to lobby for graduate school, any graduate school at that point, even after my first novel was published. However, some years before my father's death, on seeing how I was absolutely at the place I needed to be in my life with my degree from a school they hadn't heard of in Korea and assumed wrongly wasn't very good, he asked me, "How did you know? How did you know not to listen to us?" My father's question was a welcome validation of my scary, uncertain, but exhilarating decision to go to Brown, and my Ahab-like certainty that Brown would help me become the writer I wanted to be, and that on the way, if there wasn't an established path to my dream career, Brown would give me the inner resources I'd need in order to create it. This initially chaotic, mapless, planless journey has also led me in a most delightful and serendipitous twist. While I am still the slow, wordy writer I always was, the publisher of the house that is issuing my next novel, a doorstopper that was also a decade in the making, is none other than Jonathan Karp, who is my editor at the Brown Daily Herald. And they published this. Thanks.
Thank you, Marie. How many of you took courses with Bill McLaughlin? How many of you marched down to the state capitol to protest the Vietnam War with Bill McLaughlin? Didn't you do that? You going to correct my history?
I remember some people took me down there.
Oh, I thought.
To an anti-war rally, and Chris Dodd, whose father was a senator at the time and became a senator later, he was at PC, and he was leading a counter demonstration of
wow.
pro-war.
Wow.
He later changed his mind.
Right. Okay, Jonathan, I don't know if any of you have read his marvelous memoir about dyslexia, but one of the things he told me is that because of dyslexia, he thought that Brown the Brown curriculum included a course called orgasmic chemistry. So.
That's the extent of the introduction, I guess.
That is, I'm sorry.
Okay, good. And they don't, by the way, just if you're worried about it. Well, my name is Jonathan, and before I read, I have to say this. I still have no idea how the hell I got into this university, much less included in a book like this. And I'm so deeply grateful to Wendy and to Judy and to all the folks at this table for being able to participate. So thank you very much for that. So I'm going to read from my piece that's called The Dyslexic Brain Kicks Ass. And before I read from a section of this, I need to just give you a little context to it. You know, I was really never supposed to make it to a place like Brown. Struggled in school. I was the kid who spent most of the day chilling out with the janitor in the hallway in elementary school. You know, I grew up on a first-name basis with Shirley, the receptionist in the principal's office. Didn't learn to read until I was 12. Dropped out of school for about 2 years in 6th grade. Had a plan for suicide when I was 13. And really slipped through high school as an athlete, as a soccer player. And made it to my first university before Brown on soccer scholarship. And it was really there that I had a chance to reimagine myself as a learner and throw myself into the one thing I wasn't supposed to be able to do, which was school. So I took every English literature class I could. I told everyone under the sun that I was going to transfer to an Ivy League university. And I applied to them all. They all said no, but Brown said yes. So my essay picks up on my first day on campus at transfer orientation, okay? So transfer orientation went down in the basement of Mochamp on Pembroke and began with an icebreaker. We were handed a list of anonymous fun facts, and our job was to match the facts with the other students. I was terrified. Here I was with the smart kids, the kids who sat in the front row, the kids who had their hands raised, the one who got gold stars. That wasn't me. I was the dumb kid. Grew up in the stupid reading group, reading C-Spot Run, and no matter how many A's I got in English class, I still felt like I didn't belong. So that first night at Brown, I stood in the corner during the icebreakers, and I started to head to the bathroom, where I used to hide as a kid to escape reading out loud. But when I looked up, a student was blocking my way. He had purple hair, he had bicycle chains around his wrists like bracelets, he had paint-stained pants and the elongated consonants of Hanover, New Hampshire. My name's Dave, he said, as he ran his finger down the list of fun facts. I got it, he said, pointing at me wildly. Circus performer. I didn't get the joke, and very seriously I said, no, I played Division I soccer. No way, he shouted. Don't buy that for a second. You, I said nervously. Investment banker, he deadpanned. Now, he said, tell me something you've never told anyone else. In that moment, I thought about my mom. You know, I'd really made it through school because of my mom. You didn't mess with Colleen Mooney. 5'1", on high heels, little Irish bulldog. Raised my brothers and two sisters on welfare in San Francisco. Had a high-pitched, squeaky voice like Mickey Mouse and cursed like a truck driver. And if you were doing wrong by her son, you did not want cursing Mickey Mouse in your office, right? But that's where my mom was, fighting for me, believing in me, and giving me the message that nothing was wrong with me. So I decided to answer Dave's question honestly. I said, I didn't learn to read until I was 12. Dave stopped moving. Now that's cool, he said. Cool? Yeah. Are you kidding? He said. The dyslexic brain kicks ass. Then he told me his story. High school dropout, struggled with substance abuse, graduated from a 2-year college for kids with learning disabilities. Dave was the first of many truly singular people I met at Brown. Later, I'd meet Becky, my Patrick Ewing adoring, John Sparks worshiping, West African dancing, fluent in American Sign Language and Spanish, tough little New Yorker future wife. Dave and Becky were the beginning of many. People whose passions and interests radiated out of them in concentric circles and could never be squared. Brown is populated with these rare mutants. They and I found a home at Brown. I felt like a freak my whole life, but at Brown, difference was the norm. You know, it's common in education to tell kids they're special snowflakes, and then in the same breath, tell them to sit their special snowflake ass down and learn like everyone else. Not at Brown. I did over half of my education as an independent study here. Took time off, wrote my first book, founded a nonprofit, went to a naked party and wrote a lit theory paper about it. At Brown, I wasn't the dumb kid anymore. I learned that I never was.
Thank you, Jonathan. I always think that the best writing touches people in some special way, so I think it would be really interesting to have a conversation with the audience, to talk with each of these writers about aspects of their pieces that touched you, that you remember. We all share this common history, which is really unusual in the setting, a reading setting. So surely you're not going to be shy. Yes.
So a very general comment, not directed at any particular author, but the entire book that we all graduated class of 2014 3 months ago, and I think it's sort of the first introduction to what it means to be an alum and to have these shared experiences with people who were never on campus when we were. It was really cool.
That's great. Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you. Do you work at the bookstore? No. No, that was a joke. Sorry. Anybody else? Can we talk about each other's work then?
Sure. Well, I think that's a
here's
great
somebody
point, though,
way
to have that perspective, because we're all lucky to have been out for a little while. I would imagine we would have wrote or drawn different things had we been asked to do this assignment the year we got out of school. So I think that perspective and the way you filter those memories is really important. And that's why, it's also a great conversation beginner, that anyone who reads the book can say, I think I have a nice story that I want to write down about what my experience at Brown was like. And it's great to put those memories down however you do them. So I think it's a nice inspiration.
And Sean, something else comes to mind, and that's the power of telling stories and telling your story. And something I would empower the current students in the audience now is to share that story broadly. Like, literally in that moment that I wrote about, if Dave Cole, and Dave Cole became the author of, we co-authored a book called Learning Outside the Lines that we published with Simon & Schuster right after we graduated. We worked on it in school here. If Dave wouldn't have said that story to me, wouldn't have shared himself, opened himself up, I don't know if I would have ever made it. And what you learn, and what I learned in this is narrative and stories gives us a sense of the broad human diversity that exists. And that this idea of normal just is sort of a fiction, right? Like, where does that come from? There's this great quote that I love, which is, the only normal people are people you don't know very well, right? and so the moment you get to know a human being in a story and a narrative, all of those things sort of dissipate, and you find a deep human connection. And stories consistently kept me through Brown, kept me going. And then having faculty, and it's really important to recognize them. They're not here today, but it's important to do it. Faculty who took my story seriously, and my project seriously. Elizabeth Thayer, who runs the nonfiction writing program here. She did 3 independent studies with me about my book. Would never have finished the book if it wasn't for her, would never have graduated if it wasn't for the credit. Tamar Katz, who's an eminent literary theorist in postmodern literature in the city, she was my advisor, and she empowered me to piece together an education that wasn't just about sort of thinking, but also doing, and validating that doing part, which is sometimes left behind in higher education, but not here at Brown. So that was really important.
Thank you. Anybody, you had your hand up earlier?
Yeah, you talked before about kind of feeling and inspiration from. Sorry, you talked before about feeling and inspiration from the authors. So something to Jonathan in particular. So I used to be the kid who would go to the bathroom to avoid reading. And in high school, I had situations where my BC calculus teacher would not allow me into the course because I'm dyslexic. And that day, I found your book, and I read it. It's actually the only physical book I've read in the past 4 years. I found it in my mom's bookshelf. Aside from that, I listened to audiobooks, and somehow I ended up at Brown. So it was a very touching book to me, and it inspired me a lot. And if you have a moment after this, I'd love to grab coffee with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great.
Anybody else? Yes.
I'm Wendy's daughter, and I'm proud of her for what she did with this, and I think all the contributions are really great. But something that the two of us have been talking about, we both spend time as alumni, coming back to College Hill, kind of frequently. And we've been talking about sort of the regrets of every time coming back here, seeing all of the amazing things that are going on, and thinking that 4 years was not long enough. And I mean, not to sort of open anything that's painful particularly, but I wonder when you come back, or when you sort of reflect on your time here, are there certain things that you sort of missed, or you know, you were sort of strayed in one direction and think that it would have been worthwhile to do something else? Or do you have any stories about kind of general regrets of the things that you missed here?
I can answer that. I actually did a drawing for the Brown Alumni Monthly about something similar to that. At my 20th reunion, I did a drawing about an alum returning after 20 years, not having been back in campus at all, and he's outside the library returning some books. So that was one regret I had, all those books that I never brought back to campus. But one of the greatest things about reunions and coming back to campus is meeting people who I didn't really know well, but who were kind of peripheral, and seeing how extraordinary they are. Either I've changed, or they changed, or we're just growing together. And so every time I come back, it's almost like the experience of those 4 years is still continuing, and I'm still adding to it. So I feel very lucky for that.
Anybody in the audience?
I regret only going to one naked party. So if you got to fix that if you got time, okay? Because it happens every year, you know. But you know, in all honesty, I
regret there were no naked parties.
how is that possible? That's wrong. You know, in all honesty, my junior year here, I won something called the Truman Fellowship for Public Service, which is a national graduate competition for to go to graduate school. They give you some money, and I spent a year after graduation trying to figure out where would I use this, and had discovered pretty quickly that Brown had ruined me for any other form of education, because and I went back to the Truman Committee and I said, I know this is for a master's or PhD, but can I go back to Brown and get another BA? Are you okay with that? And you know, why I couldn't do that, I hold on to the inspiration of being somebody for whom learning is not an end in and of it, but it's a process, and it's something that I take with me everywhere I go. And it's probably the greatest gift that I got from Brown, besides those naked parties.
Charlie, I'm curious, because you've had the longest kind of relationship with Brown. Both regrets and also what's the biggest change you've seen?
Well, first of all, we live only a few blocks from here, so I'm here often. My one regret that I would have, it may sound odd, but I wish I had learned more, spent more time as a student. I always say Elizabeth was a student, and we go to England or something, and she'll know the history, and she reads Shakespeare and all this stuff. And I really wasn't, I have Professor Lipset here. I struggled to get through his Psychology 30 class. It was, I wasn't, it's not that I couldn't do the work, I just wasn't really as interested as I should be, and I spent a lot of time at the Brown Daily Herald. And I called there yesterday to tell them about something, and to tell them that 50 years ago tomorrow, President Johnson spoke. And so a fellow answered, and I said, who are you? He said, I'm the office manager. So I said, well, could I talk to some editors? And he said, oh, they don't come in on Friday. They come in Sunday for the Monday paper. And I thought, well, we used to be there all the time. As for changes, when I walk around campus, some of them are very evident, the tremendous increase in the number of women, the way people dress. The women in our day wouldn't be allowed on the main campus the way students dress today. The cell phones, the trucks that are around. There's a Korean barbecue truck that parks in front of Hageman and Caswell, and I always say to them, where were you when I needed you? So things like that, and then sometimes I think of things that, like the ones in the book here, where I say, gee, did that really happen? And for instance, if I'm walking over on the Pembroke campus there, and I see a dormitory, and I think, oh yeah, I used to go in there before exams because I was such a poor student in class. I didn't really take many notes. I missed a lot of classes. And I would go in there and I would find some Pembroker who were really good note takers. And I would say, could I see your notes? And they would bring them out and I would read them and whatever. And I say in the book, what is more incredible, that I would do that or that they would agree to show me the notes? So.
And Marie, talk a little bit about, you learned some of your writing in history classes too, so.
You know, that was actually the only history class I took.
Oh, okay.
But to some degree, that's what was so great about my Brown experience, and I can address the regret thing because I actually have no regrets. Brown is really the place because I actually did really well in the class. The TA was amazing. I thought, oh, I got to major in history. This is what I do, and I'm getting back into my whole structure brain. But then I just thought, nah, you know what? This is just part of some random thing that I have no idea what's going to happen. And I have to say, the 20 years until I finally became a writer were ones of sheer terror. I was working in an investment bank and trying to do stuff. I had no idea how this was going to work out. But it really was, Brown was just sort of, I'm not even sure why I felt that way. It might have been more just watching my peers, feeling just very comfortable with uncertainty, that I didn't feel like I had to have a plan. I teach at Columbia now, and everyone who's in my writing classes, they're like, I got to be a writer, and I'm going to do this and do this and this, and it's very, I got it. It's very, rigid, and if I don't know what's going to happen, and in a weird way, I kind of feel like, well, I never got a graduate degree. I don't really know how you become a writer, but that's just kind of how. And sorry, I have to do one small Jack Thomas story because you wanted to know one about the bomb, because this is one thing that history has affected my teaching to some degree. So my husband was a history major, and that we met at Brown as well. And he said that one day they were in Jack Thomas's class, and he was smoking a lot, and he'd just be this kind of really taciturn person, and they hadn't done the reading. Like, you've never done that, right? You've never come to a class on a Friday and not done the reading, right? And he, at one point, just shut his book, slammed it down, and said, God damn it, this is not worth my time, and just turned around and left. And I've never been able to quite get up to that point, but it helps me with my sort of teaching in terms of, yeah, my time is valuable as well, and I can see you. So that's what I've learned.
Well, I hope you'll all buy the Brown Reader. Does anybody have a last comment to make? I think you'll just find this, it's so rich, and there's so much detail, and Sean's is not the only graphic piece in it. There's some other really fabulous graphic contributions as well.
I just want to add one tiny, tiny thought. First of all, I have no regrets at all. Because I can't think of anything, maybe because my memory is so bad, I can't think of anything I would have done differently. I just want to say that I don't know how this works out. I have a child who has learning disabilities. I'm going to ask you to sign your book for him. But there were kids who I went to Brown with who had learning disabilities, or were dyslexic. And it was never discussed, but Brown has always done this in a super quiet way. There were also kids who were older, a lot older, who had done something else. They've been in the military when I went here. You know, they've been to Vietnam. It's like Brown has always done this, but it was never anything that was discussed in any official way, or we have a program for this, or this is part of, now it's called diversity, word I hate, you know, because it just was something that they did. So, I don't, you know, I was always aware of it, but I never, you know, I always thought it was just something that they did, but they always did it. So,
It's a great, great
yeah.
So, thank you all for coming.